everybody. We are starting out season 2 of Let's Do Lunch, and today is Monday, which is our business of streaming day. We have a terrific show planned for you today. First off, my name is Ned Sherman. I am co-founder of Digital Media Wire, which is the producer and owner of Let's Do Lunch. I'm also a partner at Manat, Phelps & Phillips and head our digital and technology transactions department. I'm going to ask you to do something. First off, I'm going to introduce myself right now in the chat. So hopefully everybody can see my introduction. And if you can do the same, we'd love to see who's here. You're welcome to, like I did, include your LinkedIn. Hey, Ron, good to meet you. And when you do that, Ron and others, please make sure to change the drop down from hosts and panelists to everyone so that everybody can see your introductions. As I mentioned, Mondays are our business of streaming day. We have a terrific show, but first let me introduce our host, Colin Dixon. Colin has been our moderator since we started Let's Do Lunch for our business of streaming days. He is the chief analyst and founder at Endscreen Media. Welcome back, Colin Dixon.
Thank you, Ned. So I'm just wondering, are we going for NCIS? Are we going to have 15 or 16 seasons?
You know, you just never know, but here we are in season 2. I think we're ready to rock and roll.
I think we are too. And boy, as you say, we have a great show to open up the season. So we have TiVo with us today. And if anybody hasn't downloaded the TiVo Video Trends Report for the first half of 2021, they really should do that because it's a great read. Tons of interesting data. And as we're very lucky today, we've got Scott Maddux, who's VP of Content Strategy and Business Development at TiVo. Welcome, Scott. And we have Fariba Zamaniyan, and she's VP of Sales, Advertising and Monetization at TiVo. Fariba, welcome.
Hello, how are you?
I knew, you told me how to pronounce your name. I knew I was going to mess it up, but hopefully I'll get it wrong and get it right later.
Folks.
Thanks, Ned. And I just want to encourage you, if you have a question for Fariba or for Scott, or for me even, put it in the Q&A window. Don't put it in the chat window. We won't see it there. I've got a weather eye on the questions, so if appropriate, I'll slot it into our conversation as we go along. And I guarantee you that we'll reserve time at the end to address your questions. And boy, you're going to have a lot of questions because there's a lot of data we're going to cover today. So let's get started with, I think one of the standout things about the report, you led with it right up front, was the 8.8 TV services number. And I want us to decompose that number. First of all, tell us what that number means exactly, and then let's decompose it a little bit. So why don't we start off with you, Fariba, on that?
Sure. No, thank you so much, Colin. It's great to be here today, and thanks for the time to take you through this latest update. And I think, as Colin mentioned, my name is Fariba Zamaniyan. I'm Vice President. I manage our data and monetization sales. And the reason why you've got Scott and I is I'm basically represent the buy side of the coin, and Scott coming from the sell side to give you a couple of perspectives as we analyze the report and the latest update. And so we've been doing this report for a number of years. We're heading into our 10th year, and we've asked this question in terms of the number of services each respondent that we survey, which is comprised of nearly 5,000 survey respondents, over 18 balanced quota sample. And what we found in this latest update through the first half of 2021 is that the number of services that people are subscribing to across 5 years has more than doubled. So across that time frame, that doesn't seem like a lot, but probably what the greatest takeaway is in this 6-month update in looking at the first half of 21 versus the second half of 2020 is that number is increased or accelerated by 30%. So the average number of services that an adult subscribes to has increased from an average of 4 to 8.8 in this latest update. And for some of you, that may be like, oh, that's nothing. I've got over 15 and I've got 20. But when you look at the average across the population, that's an incredibly large number, as we're coming from a way that had been so instituted of accessing content through a single medium, through your cable provider, or through a single access point that has grown exponentially, is really a sign of the time, in that the digitization and availability of ways to get at video is accelerated by an incredible amount. And certainly it did not slow down during the pandemic period, where we were hungering for content and entertainment to occupy our time. So it's an incredible number, and we're going to fill you in a little bit more on what makes up that number as to how did it grow to nearly 9, and even more when you break it down by population groups.
Yeah, big step up in the first half, right, Scott?
Yeah, so just quick intro myself, Scott Maddux, VP of Content Strategy and Business Development. And one of the things I look after, as Fariba mentioned, we kind of offer two sides of the same coin. I really look after the content side of our business. I work with all the content partners, and specifically driving the AVOD and fast channel side of what is TiVo Plus. Now there's 166 channels, over 100,000 assets on the AVOD catalog side. So I'm working with all those studios, networks, digital brands, and labels as well, to help really bring that content to the forefront. But all that is all about the business side of that is how we build our both subscription advertising business. So yes, the numbers here are, I think, really phenomenal. And what we saw, as Fariba mentioned, the number of services accessed by consumers jumped over 30% in the past 6 months. So it's important, I think, to remember the context of this survey really took place right in the middle of COVID and quarantine. So that's been, a tremendous accelerant for OTT, AVOD, and all the subscription services as well. When we break it down just one notch, there's also an interesting subcomponent in the 18 to 30 age band. The average number of services accessed, both SVOD and AVOD, is 11.3. So those are, 8.8 is a big number, 11.3 is a huge number. And I think what's interesting here, the average numbers of services have accelerated over the past few years. I think we're starting to see a tipping point, because we'll talk about this a little later, but we're starting to see some of the pain points, and that comes through in the data and the response of what consumers are now looking for to help manage all those services.
Right. That's definitely going to be one of the topics that we deal with today as we go through the data. I should say that it's a pretty sizable survey group. It's 4,500 people in Canada and the US. So that's the basis of all of the data that we're looking at. So why don't we dig in here? And I guess the first area, well, actually, there's one thing I wanted to mention before we go there. It's 3.7 of those services are free ad supported or free services, right? And the rest are paid services. Have I got that right, Scott?
Yeah, that's right. The 8.8 number is across free and subscription, and that includes YouTube, and obviously the Netflix, the Hulu's, and Pluto's and Zumos of the world. So that's how many services people are accessing overall.
And in the paid portion, that includes SVOD and more traditional pay TV services.
And pay TV.
Yeah, very good. So let's talk about money. Let's talk about the cost of all of this. Fariba, walk us through the cost. It's getting pretty pricey, isn't it?
Yeah, it's an out-of-pocket that's averaging about $142 a month for the net of, your internet and video services. And when you break it down to the bundles, they're averaging around $30 to $35. But I think that what we found is that the price, as we created this beast as an industry where we've given consumers a host of different vehicles. Like we said, the average is now 8.8 to access great content. We've got spin-offs on platforms, the Disney Pluses, et cetera, that consumers have been willing to try and to spend out of pocket, whether they're trading out their pay TV and canceling it and adding on subscription services, or they're keeping their pay TV and then adding on average, is spending over $140, which is a lot of money when you think about it. And with all of the services that are being launched, and we've seen most recently with Discovery Plus, for example, is one of the bigger announcements as of late, is that there's a willingness and an interest, if the content is there, to spend the money. However, as the consumer looks to the portfolio of how much they're spending, but relative to the quality, the ease of accessibility, how unified, how efficient is it for them to get to and find what they want to watch, is when the trade-off of cost relative to the return is kind of that inflection point that we're seeing right now, that Scott touched on, is that we're expecting, as we go forward into the latter half of 21 and into 2022, is that consumers are smart, right? They have this opportunity with the pandemic to really consume a lot, but also pay attention to how much they're spending, and how many services are available to them, and what are they getting out of and enjoying from each of those services. So now it's a matter of, I'm willing to spend, but am I getting what I want out of each of those platforms in terms of a catalog that I can constantly enjoy, ease of identifying it, and a willingness to pay for it. So $142 a month to get your internet and video is a lot to spend for the average respondent, but there's a willingness to pay if the return is available.
Yeah,
I think, Fariba, I love your comment that we as an industry we created this beast. It's also from the consumer perspective, the consumer's kind of getting what they asked for, but as always, you have to be careful what you ask for, right? So the consumer wanted to move beyond cable, they wanted choice, they wanted kind of a a la carte solutions, and here we are with all of those services available. But again, with that comes complexity, and as we see in the numbers, the monthly spend has not really gone down, right? The broadband fees average around $50 a month, but the SVOD services are averaging about $30 a month. That's how much the consumers in this report are spending for SVOD services. But then there's also TVOD spend. So people are increasingly spending money on premium and TVOD or transactional solutions. Like if you want one episode or one season of a particular show, people aren't afraid to do that anymore. So, but all that adds up. The TVOD is $11 to $26 a month. That's a lot, right? But you said now you add SVOD plus TVOD plus your broadband bill, and you're back up pretty close to where you were with cable, back in the day.
The thing that surprised me about this data, and it has in years past as well, is that those who are paying the most are also spending the most on SVOD services, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's relevant to, income levels. So in terms of demographics, the more you're higher the income, the greater the willingness to spend. So it's absolutely supported by what we saw with the composition and response by the sample that we surveyed.
Yeah.
So I think this also tees up the tailwinds we see for AVOD. Right. I mean, this has also been, I think, one of the headlines coming out of this survey in the industry overall, where, we've seen the explosion of premium OTT services. And just over the past sort of 24 months, Disney Plus, HBO Max, Peacock, et cetera, great services. But we're also seeing the ascension of AVOD services. So Pluto, Zumo, IMDb TV, Tubi, right? And interestingly, each of those are part of very large media companies. So Pluto is part of Viacom CBS, right? Zumo was acquired by Comcast, NBCU. IMDb TV, part of Amazon and a complement to Prime Video. And Tubi, acquired by Fox. So that's no accident, right? Each of those AVOD solutions now are part of what I think of as freemium entertainment portfolios owned and operated by these tier one media companies. And from a consumer perspective, Pluto is an example. It's almost top of the funnel. That's an easy place to start. And if you watch some of those Pluto channels, you'll start seeing ads for Paramount Plus, right? So they're using Pluto to upsell to premium services. But there's also being able to catch the consumer that wants to manage their spend and essentially churn off those premium services. Well, now there's a place to catch it. And for media companies now, they can monetize both on the subscription side of that equation and the ad-supported side, the traditional advertising-driven side of the equation. I think that's also a really interesting sort of trend, both from the inside industry perspective as well as the consumer perspective.
Right. And it's really interesting that you're seeing Peacock where you're combining the two approaches, where that is a real freemium service, right? Free entry into a tier service, and then they've got plenty of reason to encourage you to subscribe to their next tier and then their upper tier. So very definitely. But there is one interesting thing that showed up here with this massive increase in the number of services, and that's churn, right?
Right.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's, one of the things that's incredibly surprising coming out of the report is that one would think, oh, pay TV is getting, the brunt of all the churn, traditional linear access points. But in essence, we really are seeing it as much for the SVOD services. There's a tremendous amount of churn that's happening as, you see this 8.8 number and the number of services that are growing. A point that I made is why, we're looking for quality. The consumer in this latest update is saying, yeah, my price is an issue, but guess what? The ability to find the shows that I want to watch with ease, so the discovery component, but also the quality, the programming that's available, that they don't run out of choice. So in terms of if I sign up for one of the services and I run out of content real quick, then you're going to lose that respondent just as quick. And it also introduces the additional element of licensing. You've got what happened with Netflix, for example, lost the license to the Friends catalog as HBO Max brought it in-house. That's an opportunity for churn because you've got the loyalists to the program content that are going to follow the content where it's available. And so that is another item that appeared in this latest, is that you've got nearly a quarter of the respondents that are saying it's about the quality as much as it is the cost. So we tend to think it's primarily going to be the leading driver when it comes to out-of-pocket expense, but it really is the combination of the two that consumers are telling us in this latest update.
So the churn in SVOD is double that of pay TV. And it's been pretty painful in the past for pay TV operators. Certainly, churn is a tremendous, risk and cost center. So yeah, it's very, very high for SVOD. And again, not surprising from a consumer perspective. The consumer will get what they want, and they'll, back in the day, they were jumping from, I'll turn HBO on just to watch The Sopranos and end of season, drop it, right? So that was always happening. Now it's easier than ever with SVOD services. So churn is definitely very, very high. It's also driving the kind of the need for and some of the pain points for consumers. They're looking for unified solutions now because they're realizing that it's hard kind of juggling these services. They're looking for unified and simplified billing solutions, for example. But I wanted to just go back to the point that Fariba made about quality, and I think it's interesting to watch brands like IMDb TV in particular, because they're leveraging Amazon Studios. They're producing originals out of Amazon Studios. That's a first in the AVOD space, right? AVOD was always sort of picking up back catalog movies and series and doing very well with it, but it's only very recently that we see the AVOD brands starting to dip into originals. And I think we'll see more of that. That'll be exclusives as well. Pluto's coming up with a James Bond channel to tie into the release of the James Bond movie. We expect that to do very well. Leverage Redemption was an original series from IMDb, original and exclusive to IMDb TV, but straight out of produced out of Amazon Studios. So I think that quality question, and both in terms of content originals and exclusives, is going to come into play as the battleground kind of heats up, right? The battleground for loyalty and viewership. Content is going to define that in the end.
Yeah. By the way, Ron Needham says hi, Scott. He's asking you, do you have any data on how much churn is dip in, dip out versus real service abandonment?
I don't know that we do, but it's a great question, and let me dig into that with Kase, who structured the survey in the first place. Let's come back to you, Ron. Good to reconnect. It's a good question. I think my instinct is that a lot of it is dip in, dip out. I think consumers are popping on and off services regularly, so that's one.
But they also can, right? I mean, it's enabled. It's a lot easier. It's a lot easier than tapping into a cable subscription that you're required or bound to for 2 years. This is the flexibility and ease of coming in and out of a service with a 7-day trial, a 30-day trial, and then you can cancel at any time is, kind of opening the door for that churn to take place.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it sure does. And my sense is in other data that I've seen that it is a lot of dip in, dip out. And I think that speaks to something that all operators should bear in mind. And that is, just because a customer is not paying you at that particular time doesn't mean to say they're not still a customer. You should treat them as such, and you should reach out to them as such. Because they're quite likely they'll come back if you have a decent show that they want to see. Okay, so that's churn. I want to return to something that you mentioned, which is you mentioned, Scott, which is the desire for unified discovery and billing. Obviously, with so many services, we're managing so many services, it's much more difficult for us to figure out where to find things to watch. And managing all of those bills. Did you see that in the data? Did you see a big interest in unified discovery and unified billing?
Yeah, so there's definitely a desire. And again, this is, think of it as a pain point, right? When the consumer says they want or they're looking for a unified solution, it's because they're juggling too many bits and pieces. And I think it manifests in different ways. One is billing, right? If I've got 5 or 6 SVOD services, I'd love to have one place to do that rather than do those on a sort of a case-by-case basis. The other is around discovery, right? So we all had the experience and started out, we called it the Friday night problem. You go down the Netflix rabbit hole, right? Sit down on the sofa, pick up the remote with your loved one, and you go down a Netflix rabbit hole. You come back up, you go down the Hulu rabbit hole. Come back up, go down the Prime rabbit hole. So that's an arduous task, right? That's spending more time with search and user experience than actually, watching. So and we're seeing, particularly Android's a good example of this. Apple does this very well, and and we do it. TiVo do this very well. It's a holistic user experience that puts content first and service second, in a way. And by that, I mean people are typically sitting down to watch a given show, a movie, a series. So they want its content first. They're not sitting down to go, oh, hey, let's go to service X. There's definitely, that comes through in the data. People want unified search and discovery solutions, and people want unified billing solutions. And I honestly think, pay TV has been, pretty beat up over the past number of years, but there's an opportunity there, right? Because we think of pay TV as the video side of cable, but their broadband customers and broadband only customers are enormously valuable. And there's an opportunity for pay TV to actually leverage some of this data and demand from the consumer side to basically reintroduce unified solutions.
And I think, just to quote a piece of data out of the actual survey, 9 out of 10 respondents want or are interested in a service that provides them with a unified means of viewing, browsing, searching, and even paying through a single platform. So there's a real high demand given how much fragmentation there is.
So let me ask both of you, obviously TiVo 4K Stream has a unified search that's built into that. So does Roku, so does Fire TV, so does Android TV. Are these getting customers, are these getting consumers somewhere towards this unified search and discovery, or are we still well short?
I think we are getting there. And I think some of those solutions, including our own, perform really well. It's interesting, I sort of look at the Android environment, And everybody's sort of up leveling, right, and becoming an aggregator of aggregators. And if you have an Android device, an Android TV or a streamer, it cuts across all services in such a way that I think starts to answer that question, right? Voice has always been one of those means of cutting across catalogs. So I think that's also an increasingly important solution. Voice has been around for a long time now, but it still sees continued uptick in terms of adoption. And I think the consumer trying to navigate this really fragmented space is also looking to voice to be part of that solution.
I mean, I think one of the telling points is that 46% of respondents that use a media player to get access to their content are going to be looking for a new media player in the next year.
Right.
So it's also about the sophistication of consumers in having this device that provides this all-in-one solution, is that they're not satisfied with it they want it to evolve. They want it to continue and advance and to have the sophistication in search and recommendation and the ease of use and the flexibility. So it's not that, okay, the media player can come in and solve this problem. It's going to continue. It's got to be an ever-changing evolution of these media players in conjunction with what is the content that's being made available through all of these services. So it's the combination of the two that will ultimately satisfy consumers, because they're constantly looking for the next best way, most efficient way, most practical way, most enjoyable way to get to their video content.
Another example of that shows up in the data, and it's the relationship between, and it's interesting, between AVOD and SVOD, right? Which were kind of two separate worlds for a long time, but another indication of how the consumer may pull them back together into something a little more unified. 81% said they would rather watch AVOD than subscribe to another SVOD service. So that means, a new movie comes out or a new series is available, they're going to be loath to fire up another SVOD account. And that's not surprising. Everybody's kind of price sensitive there. But there was another related point. 83% said wish that their paid services, and specifically like Netflix and like Prime Video, would offer an AVOD option. Now, I think most consumers probably don't realize that IMDb TV is a counterpart to Prime Video, but that 83% asking for AVOD to complement their SVOD, I think that's a very telling point, both in terms of price sensitivity and the need to help unify these services and simplify it.
So I'm glad you transitioned into AVOD and FAST services. Talk to us a little bit about what you found there. How well are the FAST services doing? One of the things that's really interesting with those, of course, is that they're now built into televisions, or pretty much any TV that you buy will have one of these services built in. And my feeling is that must be helping adoption of those. How many people are using AVOD and FAST services? And have you seen a big growth in the last year or so? Fariba, let's start with you on that.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, as you mentioned, the YouTube being one of the leading components that's adding to the bundle. But again, I'll go back to the point that a very large percentage, or even though they're becoming available on the smart TVs on the lower portion, the media players are still a dominant way in which they're getting access to all of that in that one screen. But YouTube still very popular as part of the bundle to get at the AVOD, as well as we get into Amazon, into some of the newer services like Zumo and so forth that Scott had mentioned that are now part of these larger conglomerates. Is that it comes back to that need for as much content, video content, the quality of it, and a willingness to sit through advertising. And that's really what we've seen, is that, and it makes a lot of sense in what we took away from this update, is that SVOD, with all of its fragmentation, it's been difficult to find what they want to find when they want to find it, all the points that we mentioned, which has really made it right for these AVOD services to come, where they don't have that pain point of cost, They author a breadth of programming types. We know that comedy is a big, these are big genres, large genres that they accommodate across the multitude of programming that's being offered, and doing so now through these larger platforms. You mentioned Peacock, Paramount Plus, that are bringing these this content together. So the receptivity to AVOD is growing because of the available content that's being presented, with the balance of the cost factor not being there, but yet in an easy to access. And believe it or not, people like guides. They like to use a guide, and that provides that singular view and the ability and ease to find without, you know, having as much difficulty as you could sometimes have with the voice. So I think that that's been the greatest. I know, Scott, you've got some numbers that you can share as well.
Yeah, the one comment on AVOD, it was really interesting. I was listening closely when about a month ago, Bob Bakish said that he expected Pluto to drive over $1 billion in advertising revenue next year, right? So everybody saw the potential for AVOD, but the fact that it's been accelerated and pulled in to 2022, that's a phenomenal statement from, you know, Viacom CBS. So there's clearly...
Actually, Scott, I think he said he expected it to do $1 billion this year, by the end of this year. Oh yeah.
Was it 2021?
Yeah, for the end of this year.
It's compressed yet again.
Yeah.
So again, there's ample evidence that AVOD is experiencing a real moment. I also think, you know, what Fariba just teed up there is fascinating because, and Colin, you touched on, we use the term fast and AVOD kind of loosely, but really there are two different it's interesting to address format and use cases here, because there's linear fast channels, right? Free ad-supported television, and then there's AVOD, ad-supported video on demand. And those two use cases, we at TiVo, we put them at sort of equal footing, right? We know the linear viewership remains very, very, very high, while the rest of the world is kind of over-rotated on, you know, VOD has been around for 15 plus years now, and then the OTT, the rise of OTT with Netflix and others, sort of shine the light on that directed viewership, right? And directed discovery. It's like, oh, I know what I want to watch. Here's a hit show, or here's my series. I'm going to pick up season 3, episode 12. But linear viewing remains phenomenally powerful and drives, you know, almost half the time spent. And if you include linear overall with pay TV, it's more than half. So the majority of viewership goes to linear. I think that's a very important point here. And linear fast channels are driving close to half the consumption that we see across our services. I look at some of our partners in the space and watching very closely as, you know, Pluto started life on the linear side of the world, but now they're dialing up VOD and providing search across VOD. Tubi started life as an AVOD only solution, right? So video on demand, fantastic catalog. But now with the Fox acquisition, they're starting to dial up linear as well. So those lines are all blurring. And again, the consumer's kind of winning in the end. The consumer's going to get what they want because they do want linear. They want a guide view. They want to be able to sit down and just drop into a familiar channel or brand or genre. So like, look at genre channels. It might be the Zumo action channel or the Pluto Western or sci-fi channel. People are dropping in to watch these because they're comfortable and familiar. That's important. It's not always you sit down to go target that very specific show you want to watch. So those are important. We see some of that evidence in this report as well.
Yeah.
And I think that the implications too of what we see with this growing adoption and interest in AVOD services by consumers, that we can't forget the other side of the equation, which is the advertisers. And that this expansion and adoption of AVOD services is opening up another outlet and vehicle to get the commercial message or promotional message through to drive incremental reach. So in the case where you've got linear, traditional linear, and the ability to add on without duplication additional sets of eyeballs that are willing to tune in to this freemium, as Scott coins it, programming that enables incremental opportunities for brand promotion. So this is a very exciting time to see this change. Whereas when you looked a couple of years ago, when it looked like things were shifting more to these subscription based video on demand services without advertising, certainly now is taking a turn in the right direction for advertisers.
You bet, you bet. It's a great opportunity. I've just finished, I just released a free white paper on the FAST market called Getting Fast. And the remarkable thing, I found some Comscore data that showed peak usage time of Pluto was Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And peak usage time of Netflix was the weekends.
The weekends.
So very interesting. Looks like people are they're tired in the week. They just want to watch. They come in and they put Pluto on.
Out. Yep.
You bet. So, okay. So that's the free services. I did want to touch on one thing before we go to the Q&A, and that was PVOD. You had a very interesting section on premium VOD, this idea of being able to buy access from your home to an early release window for movies. Of course, we've seen lots of experimentation with that over the last year, and with some success, I should say. What did your data tell us? What does your data tell us?
Yeah, well, there's one was the average amount spent on TVOD and PVOD, right, combined. But that's $11 to $26 a month. That's a lot, right? That's a huge uptick. And Colin, you may be, what numbers specifically? I mean, I know it's page 14. It's theaters slated for a comeback, but I'm not sure which number specifically you were referring to. I was focused very much on the money, how much people were spending every month on average, but that's across both premium, new movies that may be available, kind of limited release for $29 versus series or back catalog.
I was looking at the 58% are interested in paying to view a new movie release at home.
Right.
So this I thought was pretty interesting and really speaks to the success that folks like Disney and Time Warner Media are having, right, with PVOD.
Yeah. There's also an important economic aspect to that from the content owner or studio perspective. They're retaining a far higher percentage of that money spent, right? If a consumer's spending $29 to watch at home, the studio walks away with the vast majority of that. If they're watching through a theater, right, the theater chain takes their bite out of it. So there's this is a consumer-oriented focus. So that number is huge, right? 58% are interested in paying to watch a new movie. So I think that's here to stay, right? I don't think that's going away. But also the fact there's sort of the industry side to that, the flip side of that coin, and the economics are also going to influence how movies are distributed and how they're consumed.
And I think from a consumer perspective, I mean, I don't know about you, but I updated a lot of my technology in my household over the past year. It's easier, it's cheaper. The bigger the screen, the better. Some of the TV screens, the glass that you can put on the wall now can bring a movie experience into the household. And the average number of TV sets per household has increased. We see in the data, and you take a look at the report, you'll see in terms of the adoption of smart TVs. Certainly Samsung owns the lion's share, but it's certainly not alone. It's incredibly fragmented, but the technology is incredible. And to bring that home experience, on a large screen without having to schlep to the theater. And let's also not forget, we're still in the pandemic, especially with what's changing. It's not surprising to see that number to be 6 out of 10 respondents are willing to pay for it in their own home because it's a great experience at home. And there's nothing to say that it's going to decrease in the near future. If anything, it may also increase as we start to see new releases really rolling out as we head into the holiday with, some great flicks coming our way. So it'll be interesting to see if how large that number grows.
Yeah. And it looks like with Delta, we're stepping back into that time when we're just not comfortable going to theaters.
Yeah. So
I expect we'll see another big step up. So before we go to the audience Q&A, I have one more question for each of you. And that is there one data point that we haven't covered that surprised you? I know I have one, but Scott, why don't we start with you on that one?
Yeah, there is, of course. I'm going to go back to linear, right? So over 60% of pay TV customers self-identify as channel surfers. On average, including SVOD, AVOD, and all those other services, and all the OTT services, consumers, over 45%, so about half, are self-identifying as channel surfers. Now, and I think this is, that doesn't mean that half the world watches linear and half the world watches VOD. I think we all do both, right? But what I think is important in that data point is that to your point earlier, you saw midweek people are just sitting down to watch TV. That casual use case, that kind of drop-in viewing use case remains very, very important. So it's not all about the big hit shows and the hit series and picking up where you left off. It's very much about, I'm not sure what I want to watch. Remember, people are spending, over 4 hours a day with their televisions on. A big portion of that is in and around linear. So that's one of the data points that really jumped out for me.
Very good. Fariba, what about you?
So I think what was kind of surprising, and maybe it's not so much for others, but when looking at the data, 40% of SVOD users say that they don't use personalized recommendation, but was not just surprising in itself, but that same percentage applies to pay TV as well as virtual MVPD users. So there's no difference in personalized recommendation use between the groups. I would have expected the SVOD to have been a higher proportion given the nature of that, that medium. So it confirmed, so it made sense that something isn't right or isn't working as well in that experience for consumers, because the traditional linear is getting the same out of that use case of willing to use what's served up as, hey, maybe you should watch this, versus the SVOD experience, which says there's a lot of room for improvement there.
Yeah, I found that also very surprising, Fariba. That was a very surprising point. My point was something you did mention, which was the 46% of folks that are planning on buying a streaming media player.
Yeah.
This kind of flies in the face of other data that I've been seeing, which says that the most popular platform is a smart TV. And this sort of says people are smart. They get their TV, they'll get a smart TV, they'll hook it up, but they will not let that stop them getting the best possible user experience by going out and buying a cheap box to keep up with the latest interfaces. It's very, very interesting. Okay, so let's go to the audience Q&A. And Laura, thank you. Yes, she knows me so well. She put the poll up. So please, while we're talking, why don't you answer that poll question? So I have a poll question there about premium VOD, if you've used it, if you've used free ad-supported services, and if you would be interested in an ad-supported tier of Netflix. Been lots of talk about that. Okay, so let's get to a couple of questions. So actually, a couple of people have asked about this. Rosemary Jacobs, she asked, how does sports content play into this report? And somebody also asked about that. Did you get any data on sports content? Was that something you looked at?
We looked at genre.
Nothing deep. I think what we also saw is that, and I think what will be interesting as more and more streaming services have access to live feeds and broadcasts for regional sports, is that paying for an SVOD service or some subscription-based service, to 1 out of 10 respondents are motivated because of sports. And so as that continue, and they also come in and come out. So it also drives churn because of the seasonality of the sport that you love. So it can be a gift and a curse, but I think as it becomes more widely available, we may see that the interest in subscribing can be driven by sports, but it's also a component of churn, which is also equally notable.
Yeah, I've noticed that there's been a big uptick in the amount of live news in those linear services. Actually, there was a question about that. Do you think the live news and sports, if you take that component out, does that create a big hole in the usage?
Yeah, well, it does, but you don't have to take it out, because those those offerings are there, right? So even in the fast channel space, right, free CNN, CBS, NBC News are all there, and some alternative emerging brands as well. Sports is tougher because it's still really the big name, you know, the league sports that drive the majority of viewership, and those are still reserved primarily for the pay TV experience. That said, there are a lot of digital brands and kind of emerging brands. It's like extreme sports. It's a lot of outdoor sports, super fun, great content, but it doesn't tip into sort of the power of the big league sports. The other facet to all that, though, the leagues are also bringing digital brands, fast channel brands into the space. So NFL is NFL channel. It's not the NFL network, their pay TV solution, but it's the NFL channel. MLB, Major League Soccer, PGA, all offer digital versions. So sports is there. It's just not in the AVOD space. It's just not tipping the scale the way the league, the big games will tip, you know, where league sports will really move the needle.
Yeah. I noticed last week Tubi released the sports on Tubi section, which you mentioned fast and AVOD blurring together. This is very definitely that. These are live channels, but they probably won't include live games. They do have NFL, they do have MLB, a bunch of other stuff, but it probably won't include live games.
Right. One of the aspects back to news, because that sports and news are always kind of those are the anchors for pay TV for so long. I think news is breaking out across the space, across the AVOD space, because we also see a lot of local, you know, the demand for local remains very, very high.
Yeah.
And Fox is doing more with local news. Scripps is doing more with local through Sinclair, and CBS as well, right? So Viacom, CBS, they have a dozen local markets, right? The major DMAs are served by CBS news channels, optimized for those local markets. So news, I think all the consumer demand and needs for news are largely being met, right? It's still not your broadcast, your mainstream cable and broadcast. It's the brands are there, the programming is a little different, but I think sports still remains very much in the realm of the leagues in terms of major audiences.
You bet, you bet. Okay, so let's take the poll down, take a quick look at the poll results. So I asked, have you purchased a premium VOD movie in the last year? And it looks like 43% have. And I guess by default, 57% have not. So that's a little bit less than I was expecting. I was expecting this crowd at least to be watching more, but that's certainly, I think, higher probably than in the general population, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, agreed. That's higher than I would have expected.
Yeah. How many free ad-supported services have you used in the last month? Almost only 11% said they hadn't used any. Wow. Right on the money. Right exactly where your survey said. 46% 2 or 3, 11% 4 or 5. Yep, that's right about where your survey data sort of predicted. And finally, if Netflix were to introduce a tier of service costing $5 a month with about 6 minutes of ads per hour, would you switch? So we had 20% who would downgrade, 63% who would not change. It looks like there's not many people who are not subscribed, which is, I guess, not surprising in this audience. 14% said that they would subscribe to the cheaper tier with ads. And only 3% would not be interested. So I don't know.
I think we'd see very different results if that was put to a consumer market at large, right? Look at our audience here, probably relatively affluent, relatively sophisticated. We're all industry insiders, so we're not going to put up with those ads. But I think if you asked a really broad base of consumers, we'd see those numbers shift significantly.
I think we probably would. Scott, Fariba, look, we could have gone for a lot longer. There was a whole bunch of stuff we didn't touch in that report. So if you haven't done, for goodness sake, download that report. It's free. It's great information. You'll learn a lot from it. And Scott, Fariba, thank you so much for joining us here.
Great to be here. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Colin.
Thank you.
Back to you, Ned.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Fariba, Colin. And by the way, folks, just so you know, in the chat, you can see the link to download the report. It's right there as the last post. And Colin, what a great panel. Really enjoyed it, and interesting responses to the panel. It seems like premium VOD for movies is going to be around.
I think so.
People
It's a
pretty
thing.
it's a thing for sure.